The day I found out I was being followed. There's a reason for this, the detective said. What he showed me about my own life left me stunned. It was a Thursday morning, early spring in New York. I had just picked up a black coffee and an everything bagel from Mario's Deli on Lexington when I spotted him. The guy was leaning casually against a parked car on the other side of the street, barely noticeable in his tan jacket and faded jeans. His face was half hidden by a pair of sunglasses, but I could feel his eyes on me as I walked into my building. I chalked it up to city life. People are weird, you mind your own business. But the next day, he was there again, just as I was coming back from work. Same spot, same nonchalant pose, like he was waiting for someone. By the third day, I was starting to feel on edge. He wasn't always the same guy, but every face had that same blank stare, like they were looking right through me. I mentioned it to my friend Donovan over drinks that weekend. I know it sounds paranoid, I muttered, swirling my beer, but I swear there's someone watching me. Every day, someone new, but they've got that same vibe, you know? Donovan just laughed, clapping me on the shoulder. Mate, this is New York. Everyone's watching everyone. You probably just have a new neighbor with a weird hobby. But I knew it wasn't that simple. And by the following Tuesday, I was certain. I'd left my office a little later than usual and was making my way home, shivering under the fluorescent lights of the subway. Just as the train pulled out of the station, I glanced over my shoulder and spotted him again. This time, it was a guy in a gray hoodie, with stubble and a nervous look about him. I'd seen him at my stop more than once over the past week, and now he was on the same train car, barely 5 seats away. Enough was enough. When we pulled into my stop, I darted out of the car, taking a sharp left turn down a side street. I heard his footsteps behind me, echoing in the dark. I ducked into a small alley, heart pounding, and waited for him to pass. When he turned the corner and saw me standing there, he froze. Okay, I said, my voice coming out a lot shakier than I'd intended. Who are you? And why the hell are you following me? He blinked, his expression unreadable, then reached into his pocket. I took a step back, instinctively holding up my bag as a makeshift shield. Relax, he muttered, pulling out a card and holding it up. I'm not here to hurt you. The card read, Isaac Levitt, Winter Hill Investigations. He gestured for me to take it, his voice calm but firm. Look, there's a reason for this. I work for a private investigation firm, and I've been retained by a client to observe your movements. That's all I'm authorized to tell you here, but if you want answers, you should come by our office. It's complicated. My mind was reeling. Someone hired you to watch me? I stammered, feeling the words stick to my tongue. Who? Who the hell would do that? Isaac sighed, almost like he pitied me. I can't tell you that here, he said, glancing around as if someone else might be listening. But if you come to the office, we're authorized to share certain details. It might give you some clarity. I barely slept that night. Every dark corner of my brain churned with questions, possibilities, paranoid scenarios. Who would hire someone to tail me? And why? Was it work-related? A jilted ex? Or, God forbid, someone in my family? By morning, curiosity had chewed through any remaining sense of caution. I took the subway out to Queens, straight to Winter Hill Investigations. Their office was nondescript, squeezed between a laundromat and a pawn shop, the kind of place you'd pass 100 times and never look twice. Isaac met me in the lobby, his face unreadable. As he led me into a small office lined with manila folders and dusty file cabinets, I felt my pulse quicken. He gestured for me to sit, clearing his throat. First, I want to thank you for coming in, he began, looking me dead in the eyes. I can't imagine how confusing this must be. Confusing is putting it mildly, I replied, the edge in my voice unmistakable. So, who's behind all this? Isaac sighed, flipping open a thick folder on the desk. I'll get to that, but I need you to understand. It's a bit of a tangled web. Well, untangle it for me, I snapped, crossing my arms. He hesitated, then leaned forward, his face softening slightly. You have a cousin. Her name is Fair? I felt my jaw clench. Of course. Fair had always been the type to poke around in other people's lives, to dig for dirt just to get a reaction. Yeah, I know Fair, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What does she have to do with this? Isaac nodded, flipping through the file until he pulled out a few crisp sheets of paper. She hired us, but she wasn't the one who discovered the information. She was acting on details she found through, let's say, unconventional means. I furrowed my brow, leaning forward. What kind of details? Isaac slid a document across the table, his gaze never leaving mine. Mr. Burwell, what you're about to see might be upsetting. I swallowed, my hands trembling as I took the paper. The header was familiar, New York State Department of Vital Records. But the names, my eyes flew across them, disbelief catching in my throat. Leander Howell? I whispered, barely recognizing the name as it left my lips. Who? Who is this? Isaac cleared his throat. You. That's you. According to our investigation, the man you grew up knowing as your father wasn't actually your biological father. In fact, your entire identity was changed. Informally placed, as we call it, with another family. For a second, I couldn't speak. I could only stare at the document in front of me, each word blurring into the next. You're saying I was adopted? Not formally, no, Isaac replied, watching my reaction carefully. According to these records, your biological parents died in an accident when you were an infant. You were placed in the care of the family you grew up with, but the arrangement was unconventional. Legal details were smoothed over, to put it lightly. I felt like my world had been split in two. I had no words, no comprehension, just a mounting anger that roared in my chest. And Fair found this out? Why? For what purpose? Isaac nodded, his expression somber. She claimed she was researching family history. But when she uncovered this, she didn't come to you directly. Instead, she reached out to us to verify it. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. That's Fair for you. Always has to be the first to know, the one with the power. So, she's sitting on this, what, waiting for me to beg her for answers. Isaac shifted uncomfortably, like he had something else to add. She has asked us to share a portion of the findings with you, but she's kept some pieces back. According to her, there's one last detail she's holding on to, something she says will complete the picture. I could feel the anger bubbling up, like a slow fire simmering just beneath the surface. Fair wanted me to grovel, to come to her like some desperate fool, begging for her version of my life. I wasn't about to give her that satisfaction. Did she tell you what this missing detail is? I asked, my voice tight. Isaac shook his head. No. Just that it involves certain family assets, ones she believes you have a right to know about. But she wouldn't elaborate beyond that. I clenched my fists, barely containing the resentment bubbling up. Assets? So now Fair thought she could dangle some inheritance in front of me like a carrot, all because she couldn't resist digging around in our family's skeletons? I felt the sting of betrayal deepen with every passing second. The woman I'd once shared summer vacations with, who'd crashed at my place after her first divorce, had gone behind my back, scavenging for scraps of my life. And now she was using it all as leverage. You can tell her I'm not interested, I said, voice tight with anger. She can keep her secrets. Isaac nodded, respecting my decision. I understand. Just. If you change your mind, here's my card. And. I'm truly sorry you had to find out this way. I left the office in a daze, barely aware of my surroundings. The city's noise buzzed around me, muffled and distant. Everything felt wrong, twisted, and I wanted nothing more than to confront Fair, to look her in the eye and demand answers. But I knew it would be pointless. Fair would only manipulate the situation to suit her own agenda. Over the next few days, I could barely focus on anything else. I confronted my parents, or rather, the people who'd raised me. The conversation was strained, filled with halting words and trembling voices. They admitted, through a haze of tears, that they had taken me in after my biological parents' death. It was meant to be temporary, but I became their own child, loved and cherished. They had tried to protect me, they said, from a past that no longer mattered. And I wanted to forgive them. Part of me knew they were doing what they thought was best. But another part, the deeper, rawer part of me, couldn't shake the resentment that they'd kept this secret from me, let me grow up in a life that wasn't really mine. Every day, more letters and texts arrived from Fair. Each message was more insistent than the last, demanding I contact her for the whole truth. She hinted at some inheritance, some legacy that she claimed I had a right to. The way she worded it was insidious, as if I owed her something, as if she was granting me a privilege. And with each passing day, my resolve hardened. I didn't need her money, her truth, or her self-righteous judgment. One night, after her 5th voicemail that week, I finally listened to it all the way through. Lyle, her voice crooned, that fake warmth dripping from every word. I know this must be hard for you. But I've done you a favor here. You deserve to know where you come from, what your real heritage is. There's a legacy you're part of, something our family built. You might even have a claim to it. But we need to talk. I have the final pieces. Call me back, and I'll explain everything. I deleted the message, my hands shaking with anger. I stood there, phone still in my hand, pulse throbbing with a rage I'd never felt before. Every word Fair had said replayed in my head, taunting me. I've done you a favor. The audacity, the smugness, as if her prying and manipulations were some gift she'd bestowed upon me. She'd torn my life apart for her own twisted satisfaction, and now she thought I'd come begging to her for scraps of information about a legacy I didn't even know existed? No. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. As I stewed in my anger, an idea began to form. If Fair thought she could play me, then it was time to turn the tables. I called Isaac, the private investigator, and told him I had a proposal. He sounded wary at first, but when I laid out my plan, he agreed. And so, with a little guidance, I launched a plan that would make Fair regret ever sticking her nose into my business. The first step was simple enough. I called Fair. She answered on the first ring, her voice dripping with that same smug satisfaction. "Lyle," she said, feigning surprise, "I wasn't sure if you'd call back." "Well, you said you have the truth," I replied, keeping my tone steady, disinterested. "I figured I should hear it from you." There was a pause, just long enough for me to imagine her calculating. "Good," she finally replied. "Meet me tomorrow. There's something I need to show you." The next afternoon, I arrived at the restaurant Fair had picked, a high-end place downtown, the kind of spot where she'd feel right at home flaunting her wealth and status. She sat in a corner booth, practically preening as I approached. Her sharp gaze swept over me, assessing, and I could tell she was savoring this moment, feeling like she held all the cards. "Lyle," she said smoothly, "it's so good to see you." I forced a tight smile, sliding into the booth across from her. "Let's get to the point, Fair. You've been hounding me, sending messages, saying you have something to tell me. So, here I am. What do you want to show me?" She smirked, her fingers tapping a folder on the table between us. "This," she said, patting it as if it were a treasure chest. "This is everything, the last piece of the puzzle. Our family has an estate upstate, land, investments, trusts. It was left to be divided among heirs who could prove their lineage. Turns out, you're one of those heirs, and you have a right to claim a portion of it." I stared at her, masking my surprise. So this was her angle. She'd uncovered some family inheritance and wanted to lord it over me, making me grovel for my share. But I wasn't about to play along. "You've gone through a lot of trouble to tell me this," I said dryly, "and what's the catch? You expect something in return, don't you?" Fair's eyes gleamed, her lips curving in a sly smile. "I think it's only fair, considering the work I put into uncovering this. There's a document, a declaration, that you'll need to sign to officially claim your share. I'll need a finder's fee, a small cut of your portion, let's say, for all the trouble I went through." A finder's fee. She wanted me to pay her for prying into my life, for hiring detectives, for dangling this inheritance over my head. My jaw clenched, but I forced myself to stay calm. "That's reasonable," I replied, letting her think she'd won. "But I want to see what's in the file first. If I'm going to sign anything, I need to know what I'm dealing with." Fair laughed, sliding the folder across the table with a smug look. "Go ahead. See for yourself." I opened the folder, flipping through the papers. There was a deed to a property upstate, old trust documents, even records of bonds and investments under the family name. But I'd anticipated that Fair might try to hide something or manipulate the paperwork. Before I'd set up a little insurance policy. As soon as I touched the folder, a tiny device in my pocket, a voice recorder Isaac had recommended, began recording everything. "You know," I said slowly, glancing up at her, "it's almost poetic. You went through all this effort to find out my secrets, to piece together this legacy, and now you're the one holding all the cards. Or so you think." Her smile faltered, her eyes narrowing. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that I know you've been using this family legacy as leverage to manipulate me," I said, my voice low. "And I know you've kept things from me, probably lied on the documents to increase your own share, am I right?" Fair's face turned red, her eyes flickering with anger. "You have no idea what I've done. This was all for you, for the family. I could have kept it to myself, but I brought you into this because you deserve to know." "Right," I replied, letting out a humorless laugh. "Out of the goodness of your heart. That's why you had detectives following me around, digging up every piece of my life for leverage." Her expression hardened, and I could tell she'd run out of the fake sweetness. "You wouldn't understand, Lyle. You've always been the underdog, the one who got away with everything. All I ever wanted was what's fair. And if you have to sign over a little to me, that's justice." I raised an eyebrow, the recorder still rolling in my pocket. "Is that so? Well, maybe I'll take this to court. I'm sure a judge would love to hear how you exploited a family legacy for personal gain." The color drained from her face, and I could see the calculation behind her eyes. She was finally starting to realize she'd lost control of the situation. "You wouldn't," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. I leaned in, savoring every moment. "Watch me. And remember, Fair, if this inheritance is worth as much as you claim, you're in for a nasty surprise. I'll make sure the court knows exactly what you did, every dirty little move, every lie. I'll see to it that your share of this inheritance is cut down to the scraps you deserve." She clenched her teeth, her fingers white-knuckling the edge of the table. "You're going to regret this, Lyle," she whispered, her voice shaking with fury. "Funny," I replied, smiling as I stood up. "That's exactly what I was about to say to you." I left her there, watching her stew in her own mess, her face twisted in shock and rage. Over the next few weeks, I worked with Isaac, hiring him to dig into Fair's finances, her accounts, her hidden maneuvers to squeeze every penny out of this so-called family legacy. Isaac was a professional, and with his help, I gathered enough evidence to launch a formal complaint, bringing her greedy manipulation to light. The fallout was quick and brutal. Fair's schemes were exposed to the entire family. She was stripped of her finder's fee and barred from touching the family estate. In the end, the estate was divided fairly among the rightful heirs, with Fair receiving a small, insignificant portion. Her reputation was in ruins, her manipulative games laid bare for everyone to see. And me? I got closure, not just for myself, but for the life Fair had tried to twist and manipulate. She'd pried into my life, set detectives on me, all for the sake of power. But in the end, she'd only ended up hurting herself. One day, as I walked through Central Park, I received a message from her, her words desperate and pleading. She wanted to make amends, to explain herself, to have one last chance at redemption. I deleted the message without even opening it. After all, some legacies are worth more than money. And some people, like Fair, are better left as distant memories.